Picture a moment when the idea of American troops being deployed on U.S. streets no longer feels theoretical, but suddenly real. That was the tension hanging over Minnesota when President Donald Trump publicly warned he could invoke the Insurrection Act in response to escalating protests tied to federal immigration enforcement. What began as demonstrations over controversial ICE operations quickly evolved into a national flashpoint, raising alarms about presidential power, civil liberties, and how far the federal government can go during domestic unrest. The warning came amid days of protests in and around Minneapolis following violent encounters involving immigration and customs enforcement agents. Public anger surged after a deadly shooting during an ICE operation earlier in the month, igniting outrage among residents, immigrant advocates, and civil rights groups. Demonstrations spread rapidly, with crowds demanding accountability and questioning the aggressive tactics used by federal agents operating in local communities. As tensions grew, another incident involving a federal agent and a suspect intensified the situation. Protesters poured into the streets again, and clashes between demonstrators and law enforcement added to fears that the unrest could spiral further. For many Minnesotans, this was no longer just about immigration policy, but about safety, trust, and the presence of heavily armed federal officers in residential neighborhoods. It was against this backdrop that President Trump issued his warning. He accused protesters of undermining law and order and suggested state leaders were failing to control what he described as violent unrest. If local authorities could not restore order, he said, the federal government would step in, potentially using the Insurrection Act, a rarely invoked law that allows a president to deploy military forces domestically. This moment marked a turning point in the story. Up to this point, the unrest had largely been viewed as a local and state issue. Trump's statement elevated it into a national debate, instantly drawing reactions from politicians, legal experts, and the public. If you're following this closely, this is where the story truly shifts, because the implications extend far beyond Minnesota. Situations like this have shaped major chapters of U.S. history, and understanding what happens next could help explain where the country is headed. Supporters of the president argued that federal officers were under attack while carrying out lawful duties, and that extraordinary measures might be necessary to protect them. In their view, invoking the Insurrection Act would be a decisive move to restore order and send a message that attacks on federal agents would not be tolerated. They framed the protests as dangerous and claimed state officials were unwilling or unable to maintain control. Opponents saw the threat very differently. Minnesota's state and local leaders pushed back strongly, warning that deploying the military would only inflame tensions and undermine public trust. They emphasized that protests, even when disruptive, are a protected form of expression and should not be treated as acts of rebellion. Civil liberties advocates warned that labeling civil unrest as an insurrection risks normalizing extreme federal responses to dissent. At the heart of the controversy is the Insurrection Act itself. Passed more than 2 centuries ago, the law gives presidents sweeping authority during times of domestic crisis. It has been used sparingly in modern history, often during moments of extreme violence or to enforce civil rights when states refuse to act. Applying it in response to protests over immigration enforcement would be highly unusual and legally contentious. This is the point where many viewers start asking deeper questions. How much power should one person have during moments of unrest? Where is the line between restoring order and suppressing dissent? If you're finding yourself asking those questions too, you're not alone. And this is exactly why stories like this deserve close attention. Staying with this analysis helps make sense of decisions that could affect protests, policing, and federal authority nationwide. As legal challenges mounted and political rhetoric intensified, the situation in Minnesota became symbolic of broader national divisions. Immigration enforcement has long been a polarizing issue, and the expanded federal presence in the state sharpened those divisions. Critics argued that aggressive tactics were provoking confrontation rather than ensuring safety, while federal officials insisted they were enforcing the law as written. Meanwhile, protesters continued to gather, some peacefully and others in more confrontational ways. Community leaders urged calm, warning that violence could justify even harsher responses. The atmosphere was charged with uncertainty, as no one knew whether the president's warning would remain rhetoric or turn into action. What makes this moment especially significant is not just what might happen in Minnesota, but the precedent it could set. If the Insurrection Act were invoked under these circumstances, it could redefine how future presidents respond to protests and civil unrest. Legal scholars caution that such a move would almost certainly face court challenges and could reshape the balance of power between states and the federal government. As the nation watched closely, the situation underscored how quickly localized unrest can become a national crisis. Decisions made in moments like this often echo far beyond their immediate context, influencing policy, public trust, and the relationship between citizens and the government. In the end, the threat to invoke the Insurrection Act in Minnesota became a powerful reminder of how fragile the line is between order and overreach. It forced Americans to confront uncomfortable questions about authority, protest, and democracy itself. If you want to keep understanding stories like this as they develop, and why they matter long after the headlines fade, staying engaged with this kind of coverage ensures you don't miss the bigger picture or what comes next.